Hi there, my name's Constantine Campbell. I'm Professor and Research Director at the Sydney College of Divinity in Australia.
Dr. Constantine Campbell, welcome to Exegetically Speaking.
Thanks so much, David. Great to be with you.
Yeah, I've been wanting to have you on for quite a while now. John Landsman and I have been talking about trying to get you to join us, so today is the day. So, how did you get started reading
Great.
Greek?
Even though my mother is of Greek descent and was fluent in modern Greek, I didn't really learn much Greek growing up. So I started to learn biblical Greek in my first year as a student at Moore Theological College, which is, the Anglican seminary in Sydney. And my teacher was Richard Gibson, who was a wonderful teacher, and I had the great privilege of co-authoring a first year Greek grammar with him many years later. When I finished my studies, I was a pastor of a church for a few years while I also did a PhD at the same time. And then I went back to Moore College and taught alongside Richard Gibson. And so we were both teaching first year Greek together. We
Hmm.
did that for a number of years. And really, the grammar that we published was really born from his teaching notes.
Hmm.
So I came in, taught alongside with him. We improved it together. I helped to update some of the linguistic parts and helped to get it ready for publication. But really, the genius of the material comes from Richard, and I really believed in that the pedagogy of the book because I had experienced it myself as a student, and the
Hmm.
way that it was taught got you into the text straight away, and it was really exciting and fun, and that really kindled my love of Greek, which is basically immediate, and I've not looked back.
And you keep going, when you get your PhD, it just becomes just second nature to be in the Greek text
Yeah,
like that. You've written a
that's
new
right.
book, second edition of an earlier book, Basics of Verbal Aspect in Biblical Greek, published by Zondervan Academic. We'll be talking about that on another podcast. We'll put a link to that in the show notes. Today we're going to be chatting about Romans 5:6 because there's some pretty interesting stuff going on in there. So set this
Mm.
up for us. What's going on in Romans 5, verse 6, Con?
Well, the verse says, "For while we were still weak, at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly." And that verb there, died, which translates the Greek aorist apethanen, is sometimes relied on by commentators and preachers to make a theological point that the verb itself does not really support. So you might read in an
Hmm.
older commentary, or you might have heard it preached. I know I've heard this preached. It says Christ died, and Paul uses the aorist, which is a punctiliar action, which means Christ's death was a once-off, instantaneous event, never to be repeated. And they're criticizing, of course, the idea that in the Roman Mass, every time you celebrate the Mass, that Jesus is crucified again, or something like that.
Hmm.
And they're saying that's not possible theologically because Paul uses the aorist. And so the point I would want to make about that, and I make in the book just by way of illustration, is that, well, I might agree with the theological conclusion that Christ did die just once. And Peter says that and more explicitly in 1 Peter 3:18, which says Christ died for us.
Once
Christ
for
died
all.
for us once and
Once,
for all, the
once and for
righteous
all.
for the
Right.
unrighteous. But he actually uses the words once for all. So you know that's what he is communicating. Whereas Paul just uses the aorist simply doesn't mean what the commentators and preachers say it means. This sort of instantaneous punctiliar event, because there are several uses of the aorist where there are 400 years described by
Hmm.
this aorist verb.
So it didn't happen all at once, right?
Yeah, that's it. And so a more accurate understanding of the aorist is to say that it's summarizing an action, it's
Hmm.
summarizing an event,
Hmm.
and that's what the aorist does. And that leads us to discuss verbal aspect because the perfective aspect gives you a summary of an action rather than taking you into the details. It just says, yeah, this happened. It happened.
Hmm.
Right.
Hmm. Hmm.
So Paul's just saying, Christ died. Yeah, it happened. He's not
Right.
saying, oh, Christ died once for all,
Once for all, and
in
therefore the mass
instantaneous.
is not to be.
Yeah,
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 sometimes
yeah.
we can apologetically read text, I suppose, with an agenda.
That's
So
right.
you talked
Yeah.
about perfective aspect. What's the other kind of aspect?
The other one is called imperfective aspect, and these are the two aspects. Actually, in the scholarly discussion, it's debated how many aspects there are, but there are at least two. I argue that there are only two, and across more general linguistics, it's usually assumed that there are two aspects because really there are two viewpoints. There's a viewpoint that portrays an action or activity from the inside as though it's unfolding before your eyes. And there's a viewpoint from the outside as though you're just summarizing this happened, bam, 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 this happened, then that happened, then that happens. It's just being reported to you. You're not really experiencing it happen before your eyes, if that makes sense.
And as I read your book, what's clear is that just because you have a tense doesn't mean you have just one kind of verbal aspect.
Yeah, that's correct. Multiple tense forms can have the same aspect. An uncontroversial example of that would be the present tense form and the imperfect tense form. All the scholars agree that they both convey imperfective aspect. So you have two forms with the same aspect. Now they also convey slightly different things in addition to aspect. So the imperfect is doing something a little different from the present, but the aspect itself is the same. So they're both presenting that internal view, being used to portray an action as though it's unfolding, as though you're sitting in the middle of it while it happens.
So here in Romans 5:6, we have aorist, and aorist is perfective or imperfective aspect.
It's perfective. So I tell the students, and this analogy has been in the scholarship for ages, but this is the view from the helicopter, right? If
I
you're a
love that.
reporter,
Yeah.
yeah, if you're a reporter reporting on a street parade down there in the city, you're up in the helicopter saying, there it is. There's a street parade, right? It's just a summarized bird's eye view of the action. Yeah.
But then
Yeah.
what about the guy who's on the street itself?
You could take the same reporter even, and now he's on the street watching the parade go by, then the view of the action is totally different. Even though it's the same activity, it's a street parade. The point is where you view it from is different. And that's what aspect is really about. It's about that viewpoint, and how you're choosing to portray it for someone else to view the action that you're talking about.
Yeah.
So do you want them to view it just from a helicopter bird's eye view? Here's a summary of what happened, or more sort of dramatically in the middle of the action as it's unfolding before your eyes.
Yeah, that's a great illustration.
Yeah, and we make that choice because we have different purposes in communicating. We don't always want to communicate everything the same way. It has a different effect on our hearers depending on how we choose to communicate.
As I try to suggest to students, words not only mean things, they do things.
They do things.
And they do affect us in a variety of ways. Dr. Constantine Campbell, Basics of Verbal Aspect in Biblical Greek. Great book. Thank you, Con, for being with us today on Exegetically Speaking.
Thanks so much, David. Thanks for having me.
Exegetically Speaking is a podcast of the friends and faculty and staff of Wheaton College and the Lanier Theological Library in Houston, Texas. Today is the acceptable time to start your training in Greek and or Hebrew. Wheaton College is the best place I know to get that training. We have the faculty, we have the facilities, we have great students there. Take a look at the show notes, and the info that you need is there to get started. Or if you want to, go to the Wheaton College website and look for modern and classical languages. If the Spirit moves you, give us a 5-star rating and share this Exegetically Speaking podcast with a friend. Thanks for listening.